Well, I get the pleasure of introducing our first keynote speaker, Mr. Dave Spigelmyer. Dave is the president of the Pittsburgh-based Marcellus Shale Coalition, or the MSC, which is the region's largest shale development trade association. On behalf of the MSC's approximately 220 member companies, he works closely with elected regulators and civic community to advance the responsible shale development and the overall enhancement of the region's economy and environment. Mr. Spigelmyer was instrumental in MSC's founding in 2008, and he served as the organization's chairman, vice chairman, as well as their lead for legislative committee. Most recently, he served as vice president of Chesapeake Corporation's Appalachia Division, where he was responsible for government regulations, regulatory policy, stakeholder engagement, and communications. Prior to Chesapeake, he served in similar roles with EQT Corporation and Dominion Resources, and held other energy-related positions in New York State as well as in Washington, D.C. Dave is a Penn State graduate and is an active outdoorsman. He was born and raised in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, and he lives in southwestern Pennsylvania with his wife and 2 children. Dave?
Thank you very much for the warm introduction, and Harold and Mark, really appreciate the invitation to be with you today. It's not too hard to, let's see here, I'm sure we get to the presentation first of all. Yeah. There we go. It's not too hard to sell the MSC when I got a lead speaker like Joe Franz. I would tell you that we put the MSC together back in 2007 and early 2008, and as a guy that's been spent most of my time in the industry itself, the difference in MSC has been the joy to work with a group of professionals that lead our committees. Joe leads our Drilling Completions and Well Site Facilities Committee. We've got key technical committees in midstream and interstate pipeline development, water use, surface use, air, a number of major technical committees, including natural gas use. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to work closely with key leaders of industry broadly to support this industry. Give you a little idea about the MSC. As I mentioned, we put the organization together back in 2008. At that point, when shale was really beginning to take hold, we had significant needs in the area of public education, workforce development, and probably most importantly at the time, to modernize Pennsylvania's regulatory structure for development. Anybody have an idea what a drilling permit cost in 2008 in Pennsylvania? Anybody have an idea? Drilling permit was $100. We had 60 folks in the compliance and inspection group at the DEP. We agreed at that point early on to increase the permit fee up to a per foot drilled cost of anywhere from $3,200 to $3,600 per permit. Today, we negotiated a permit guarantee at $5,000 to be able to turn permits in a reasonable time. We've increased that permit fee to $5,000, but the other part of the equation has not been delivered. We have no permit guarantee, and I would share with you one of the major challenges, especially in the Southwest region, is that we have permit delays that are rampant and has really impacted capital development in the southwestern corner of the state. Average ESC GP2 or earth disturbance permit is 217 days out of the Southwest region, as compared to about 50 days in Ohio and less than that in West Virginia. So from a capital competitive standpoint, it's been a challenge for us in the Southwest region. We're actually working on a pilot project right now to move some of those permits over to the North Central region in Williamsport, because they have a much more predictable and certain permit turnaround time, and hopefully be able to allow us to put capital in play here in Pennsylvania. Our focus at the MSC has been on the long-term development of shale resources here in the state, not just the Marcellus, but other hydrocarbon-bearing formations. We've been focused early on in this play and trying to develop new end-use opportunities for use in Pennsylvania to keep some of that gas here in the Commonwealth, to address landowner and public concerns, as well as maximize the benefit to our region and to our country. So we've been focused on that at the MSC. They've asked me to provide you a little bit of an overview of the state of the industry. Certainly Joe provided you some great pieces there that give me the opportunity to kind of dig in a little bit. Anybody have an idea of how much gas historically we produced conventionally or vertical drilled in Pennsylvania? Do you have an idea of how much gas we produced? Feel free to raise your hand if you know. We drilled about 4,000 conventional wells a year in Pennsylvania up until 2008. Our peak, we produced 180 BCF or billion cubic feet of gas in the state. That's a quarter of Pennsylvania's natural gas supply. Where have we gone? In a very, very short period of time, we've gone from the producer of 25% of Pennsylvania's supply to more than 20% of America's supply out of Pennsylvania and more than 25% of America's supply out of the basin, and that includes Ohio and West Virginia. So it's been a very, very steep climb in terms of production activity in the Commonwealth. We're now over 5 trillion cubic feet. I mentioned a moment ago, we were at 180 billion cubic feet back in 2008. We over 5 trillion cubic feet of production now in the Commonwealth. Gives you an idea here of the number of wells drilled. About 9,700 wells drilled in the state of Pennsylvania. About 7,600 of those in production today. What's going on with the other 2,100 wells that are in that complement? They're either waiting for completion, hydraulic fracturing, they're shut in, or primarily that group is waiting on pipeline. Joe spoke a little bit about the discount. I think he used the analogy, the loaves of bread, that we have baked a lot of bread in the state, but we don't have a lot of consumers that use that bread. What's ended up happening is our major interstate takeaway capacity has not kept pace. We peak out in Pennsylvania to about 12 billion cubic feet of natural gas used in the state every day. And when I say peak, that means the coldest days of the winter or the hottest days of the summer where you have a lot of power gen burn. We peak out at 12 and we're producing in excess of 16. So we need to have modernized infrastructure in the state to be able to get that gas to market. The primary interstate takeaways I'll talk about in a few moments: Tennessee Zone 4 Lake 300, the Leidy Interconnect Point, a major storage pool in the center part of the state, and Dominion South, which is primarily the Del Mine facility out along Route 22. Those are the primary interconnect points, and if you take a look historically, we've had major discounts as compared to other basins in the U.S., and I'll speak to that in a few moments. But again, about 2,000 wells remain either shut in or waiting on pipeline. It's one of the reasons why we've been able to keep up production and continue to grow production at a period of time when rig counts have been down. Joe talked about efficiencies and longer laterals. That certainly has played a significant role. Let me just jump to this slide because I think it sends a pretty strong message. We've gone from 111 active rigs back in 2011 down to a low of 11 or 13 in June of last year. We've jumped back up to 35 rigs, and there's a bit of a buzz. Joe talked about efficiency gains and longer laterals and increasing production through really focused completions activity and making sure we're getting proper frac stage development and proper sand penetration into the formation. But I would tell you that we'll likely never see 111 rigs again, and I would tell you it's not that that's the primary driver for production, because it's not. I think that my crystal ball, I don't know that I have one, is probably a 60 rig count if we get some improvement on price in Pennsylvania, but I don't necessarily think we'll get back to 111 rigs, primarily because we're far more efficient, far more effective at developing the resource today in Pennsylvania than we were when this play kicked off early in its history. Gives you an idea here as well, the number of wells that were drilled last year. We usually ask for about 3 times the number of permits on the number of wells drilled. Last year, 504 wells developed in the state, and again, about 1,300 permits requested at $5,000 per permit. I think if you do your math, that's about $6.45 million that went to the Department of Environmental Protection for well permits. We have a $6 million carve-out of the local impact fee that passed in 2012, and about $9 million of compliance fees that the EP has requested. So well over $20 million of resource that's gone into the department. I mentioned early on, anybody have an idea today of what the staff complement of DEP is? If you read the papers, you would hear when I mentioned that number, 60 compliance and inspection staff in 2008. Anybody have an idea how many they have today?
250.
It's pretty close, Mark. They were at 220. They're down to about 195 today, but they've basically tripled the size of the department. If you read the newspapers, you would hear that DEP's continued to take slash and burn in the number of employees they've got. Not in the oil and gas section. Oil and gas section has a separate office inside that agency, a brand new office that was developed in 2009 up in Williamsport. There's a lot of focus, and I'll share another slide with you here in just a moment. Let's see if I'll jump ahead here, give you an idea of the number of inspections on a per well basis. I showed you the number of wells, 504, that were drilled this past year in Pennsylvania, 2016. Of those 504 wells, over 15,000 inspections have taken place on those locations. Let me back up. I talked a moment ago about the discounts occurring across this basin. This slide is actually one to rejoice upon for our industry. If I put this slide up from June of 2016, gas prices at every major interconnect would have been about $1.10 less than what they showed today. There's still a significant discount. Gas last week sold at $3.07 at NYMEX. Discounts at those primary locations is about 60 cents at every single point across the state. Probably the best location for us of those primary interconnect points is the Dominion South operation out of Delmont, primarily because of the Pittsburgh demand and Pittsburgh load. Plus we have 5 major interstate pipelines that come into that location, and you have takeaway capacity. Why is that takeaway important? Because if gas backs up at that interconnect point, it needs to be parked, stored, loaned. Costs are added that create significant reduction from the NYMEX price of natural gas at that location. Again, last summer, gas selling at $2.65. I know we had 1 month where gas was selling under 70 cents in Pennsylvania, led to a rig count of 11 at our low. I think my slide showed in June we were down to 13 active rigs, but we actually bottomed out at about 11 rigs in the Commonwealth. Today we're up over 35 in the state, and I would tell you it's created a bit of a buzz, certainly in the areas that each of you participate in. That's the supply chain. Back to a little bit of a sales point for MSC, I would just say that we've got a lot of supply chain members in this room today, certainly a number of our operators here as well. Supply chain plays a very, very important role in making sure that we're successful long-term in this play. It's an investment in our future. I look at some of the issues that folks like Joe have jumped into, challenge on 78A, for instance, which we're in litigation. It's all the surface activity related to well site development. As I mentioned, we're in litigation. We need the strong technical support not only from our operators, but from our supply chain folks that actually do much of that work. So we're a better organization by having you engaged. I put a few membership flyers on the front of the table. If you're not a member of the MSC, give you an idea, our Pittsburgh meeting back in January had 350 of our supply chain and upstream, downstream operators that were in the room. As well, we have a meeting this coming week in Bedford. We're at 280 right now. I think there'll be a lot of really great committee activity that takes place this week in Bedford as we continue to grapple with not only now 78A, but we have General Permit 5 and 5A. Those comments are due this week. I know a number of our folks are active in the development on the air side of preparing that language for the DEP to try and provide some guidance to them. Certainly challenge on post-production costs as well and other major issues that we're continuing to grapple with at MSC. Here's a look at production growth. I've shared where we've gone. Again, greater efficiencies in drilling technology, being more precise in our drilling activity. Anybody have an idea what the average drilling time was for a well with a 3,000-foot lateral in 2008 and 2009? I know Joe knows the answer to this. Most of our operators were in excess of 60 days to drill a well with a 3,000-foot lateral in 2008. Average turnaround time today in many locations is less than 20 days to drill a well with a 7,000 or 8,000-foot lateral. So efficiencies have been made. A lot of learning has taken place. One concern that I have is from a completion standpoint, a number of those crews are now looking for hired help because they've lost staff over the downturn over the last 2 years. So really working to make sure that the service sector and the service industry can continue to support this industry at the level that's required. Again, this was the chart I showed a few moments ago with the number of inspections done on a per well basis. Gives you an idea. 106 compliance actions against the industry. Just what I would share with you is you take a look at the history. We've continued to improve as an industry, and that's an area of focus for the MSC as well. We've continued to try and do significant training around the areas where we haven't performed as well. I'll give you, for instance, last year we had a number of compliance actions on erosion and sedimentation control. We've trained now in 3 locations across the Commonwealth with our supply chain sector to make sure that we have the best and brightest technology in play for the development of earth disturbance activity and erosion and sedimentation control in particular. Benefiting Pennsylvania customers, electric prices down 40%. Many of you may or may not know that in 2009, our Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission had sent messages broadly across Pennsylvania that rate caps were coming off and power rates in some utilities would jump as much as 100%, as low as 30%. At the same time, in 2009, production was beginning to ramp up. Natural gas historically was the last dispatch fuel for power generation and set the market price for power. We are now 1 in 3 electrons in the Commonwealth is being produced with natural gas. That price of natural gas going into power generators have kept prices down. My slide says 40% reduction in electric generation costs across the Commonwealth. I know Rob Powelson, former chairman of the PUC, spoke 2 weeks ago. He said in PJM it's been as deep as 56% reduction. I want to be conservative in my estimate based upon the research we've done, but power generation rates have been reduced because of affordable natural gas. Natural gas end-use price for consumers, depending on which utility you are, anywhere from 54 to 73% less on the purchased gas cost side in 2008, and the average annual savings based upon IHS is about $1,200 per customer. If you take a look here, this gives you an idea of the different utilities across the state. I would share with you, many of you either on the Columbia system here with a 54% reduction, or on the Peoples side in Pittsburgh with a 73% reduction in your purchase gas cost rates. Huge benefit to consumers and for manufacturers and commercial establishments as well. It's been a huge opportunity. It's where we're really trying to spend some time today. We think that affordable energy prices could be the root of developing new manufacturing opportunities for our region and putting more folks to work. Trying to make sure we get folks in government focused much the same. Again, I talked about electric generation, combined heat and power applications, certainly the development of new, I think we have 17 new power plants being capitalized in Pennsylvania. Those are all gas-fired combined cycle facilities, basically to pick up the load lost from the retirement of many older coal-fired facilities, not only in Pennsylvania but across the basin. Light and heavy-duty transportation applications, you'll see a number of vehicles on the road today that are burning natural gas, CNG, that are in the commercial side. But I would tell you that the real opportunity is coming on over-the-road transportation. Companies like UPS are invested in liquefied natural gas for over-the-road transportation. Huge savings over time as compared to oil, and we think that that has an opportunity for us in terms of to grow. Feedstock for other industries that use liquids, certainly a rebirth of manufacturing. Many of you have heard the discussion in Pennsylvania over the cracking facility in western Pennsylvania. I'll talk about that in a few moments. The biggie as well is the opportunity to change the geopolitical climate and move some natural gas to liquefaction, LNG to ship abroad, and develop a foreign LNG market. Many of you are aware of the fact that the western part of the state is under pressured. It delivers heavy hydrocarbons, ethane, pentane, butane, isobutane, natural gasolines. Not a lot of oil here, but those liquids are either fractionated or blended and sent to different locations. I'll talk about that in a moment. But of the liquids that are produced in western Pennsylvania, nearly 70% of that is ethane. That ethane is feedstock now for the development of plastics manufacturing in western Pennsylvania. The Shell petrochemical facility is now under construction. Things like paints, coatings, sealants, plastics, tires, siding, a lot of different manufactured opportunities you can see in that wheel that could be manufactured here, and we'll talk a little bit about that. What opportunity does that Shell cracker provide? It's not just the jobs in the construction and operations of that plant. I have a slide here in a moment. 6,000 construction jobs, 600 permanent jobs at that location. But it's the co-products and the byproducts that are developed there, the supply chain opportunities, true opportunities in manufacturing, and we've also had other locations that are looking at cracking facilities. I think if you take a look at the supply in West Virginia, Ohio, we could support as many as 3 to 4 crackers in this basin. A number of companies have toyed with that opportunity. I know Braskem has not only looked at West Virginia, but looked at the Marcus Hook area in Philadelphia. PTT Chemical has made an announcement already in eastern Ohio. We'll see if that comes to fruition, but they certainly have put money into taking a look at developing additional cracking facilities. There's that PTT location. You can see the Shell location, Braskem, down below Parkersburg, opportunity for cracking development in those regions, and certainly major investments. To give you an idea, the Shell facility, that's a look at their Monaca site today. It's much better than that picture shows now. It's much more ready to actually begin construction in that location. Here's a look at a facility, just to give you an idea of the complexity of that plant and why it's probably going to be 2021 or 2022 until that plant's complete. Again, that operation is nearly a $6 billion capital investment by the time it's done. 60 full-time employees, as mentioned a moment ago, 6,000 during the construction phase of that project. It reduces ethane to ethylene, secondarily produces ethylene to polyethylene, forms a low-density plastic pellet that can be made into different products. That handful of pellets at the top is basically where ethane's reduced, and you can develop lots of opportunity from that. Why are we in a great location for the development of plastics in this region? Most of the plastics today are being produced in the Gulf Coast region. It's where we've historically had most of our liquids development. We are within 700 miles of 70% of the plastic manufacturing that takes place in the United States here in western Pennsylvania. To develop those products here, let me see if I have that slide in here, I may not, but it's actually saved a significant amount of dollars in terms of transportation of the raw material to the plastics manufacturer. So the opportunity on the transportation end alone is an enormous savings to plastics manufacturers. And we think that, much like shale was when this first began, a lot of folks were focused on the supply chain jobs, the upstream jobs in drilling and completions, where now the real opportunities in downstream and end use. I think the same holds for the Shell petrochemical facility. Much of the activity and much of the attention has been paid to the 6,000 jobs that will be generated for the development of that plant and the 600 permanent jobs. I think the real aha moment comes from the downstream manufacturing opportunities that are generated by having those raw materials produced here in western Pennsylvania and develop new plastics manufacturing right here in the basin. And it doesn't mean it has to be in western Pennsylvania. I think eastern Ohio gets a fair shake at this, West Virginia gets a fair shake, and I think the entire Commonwealth, especially Philadelphia. Philadelphia, folks don't realize, has the furthest inland port on the eastern seaboard. There's huge opportunities for the Philadelphia market to become an energy hub and an opportunity to grow manufacturing in that basin. They've got great skilled labor across the Commonwealth and certainly in the Philadelphia region, and I think that you get into the mid 2025, I think you're going to see some new manufacturing operations begin to really take hold in this region. And I think, as I said earlier, when we put this coalition together back in 2008, it was all focused on the upstream jobs and the midstream jobs as well as supply chain work. I think the real opportunity will be in downstream manufacturing when this is all said and done. As well, if Joe was still sitting here, I would share with you, there are different options for use of ethane and liquids being developed. The Mariner East line is already under operations in Pennsylvania. It's moving ethane into the port of Philadelphia. I'll share with you a slide in a moment to talk a little bit about that market. But those of you that travel the turnpike regularly, you'll notice, especially over in the Carlisle area, I think there's 19 different spreads right now of pipeline development on Mariner 2. Mariner 2 is under construction, and that will deliver a blended propane and butane mix into the Port of Philadelphia, and it'll be separated there. Many of you have seen the investments made by Mark West in either Eastern Ohio or here in Western Pennsylvania at the Houston plant or the plant above Zelienople. Those are fractionators that take those different liquids and separate those different elements out for feedstock fuels. Now we'll take a butane into propane, send it into the Port of Philadelphia, and Marcus Hook, they'll separate those products. Unfortunately, because of the Jones Act, propane in particular gets sent into foreign waters before it can come back into the U.S. We don't have a direct pipeline conduit to get propane up into New England. Propane's very in high demand in the northern New England market, so it goes abroad before it comes back into the U.S., adds a level of cost there. It's hard to build pipeline. Many of you have probably seen the pushback from New York State. We've seen the same kind of pushback in New England, yet during the winter months. We've all, and I showed that slide a few moments ago of the savings we have in Western Pennsylvania. We don't have that savings in New England because the capacity charges are so great during the coldest winter months of the year. I'll move along pretty quick. When I talked about movement of ethane into the Port of Philadelphia, INEOS, a European company, has 4 major tankers. It's actually moving ethane into across the Atlantic and into Newfoundland and into Norway and a number of European locations for chemical manufacturing. Again, everyday uses of gas that you're all aware of. You know, folks don't really connect the dots regularly. You know, Mark Ruffalo, many of you probably have read some of his stuff opposing hydraulic fracturing. Yet the last I looked, this year alone, he's made 21 trips from New York to LA at a fuel burn on his jets at 1,000 gallons an hour. There's no one in that I've worked with that have seen that kind of a carbon footprint. Anyhow, we heat our homes, cook our food, dry our clothes, heat our hot water at home, but it's all steel, glass, plastics, chemicals, fertilizer development for our foods, powdered metal products. Today, 1 in 3 electrons, all generated with natural gas. And if you start looking at life-sustaining items that are produced every day, pharmaceutical medications, plastics that are used in hospitals and facilities all across the globe, steel and glass manufacturing, chemicals that are used to sterilize everything in our society, fertilizing our food supplies, fertilizers are all made through the use of natural gas. Many of you know the MSC conducts a major conference every year. We've actually merged that conference with the Ohio Oil and Gas Association as well as Wavonga to make this conference look a little more regional in its focus. Last year, candidate Donald Trump spoke at that conference. This year we're really working hard to get Rick Perry, who's Secretary of Energy, as well as Scott Pruitt, the head of EPA, to speak at that conference. We've not been confirmed yet, but we are on their agenda. So that conference is coming up September 27 and 28. I bring this up because, you know, we're not, as an industry, we don't get our people out. And I didn't get into a lot of the challenges we face from a regulatory perspective. I hope you ask me a question about that. I'm happy to respond to that. But probably the one area that we've really seen pushback is in the areas of local government interference. Those of you that support pipeline development, it's been very, very clear that folks that don't want to see, want to see fossil fuels kept in the ground, don't want to see pipelines developed. They're showing up at every single township meeting, every county meeting to try and slow or stop pipeline development, not only here in Pennsylvania, but broadly across the basin. I would ask you to get engaged. I'd ask you to have your employees get engaged, attend. Your jobs are at risk. I think it's probably the aha moment for folks when they realize that, the Heinz Endowments in Pittsburgh has spent $30 million to try and stop this industry dead in its tracks. You need to get engaged. The MSC has developed United Shale Advocates. It's an information source to try and get engaged, and would ask you, even if you don't become a member, it's not a pay thing. United Shale Advocates is an information tool that we send out to our membership, and hopefully try and get folks engaged in the debates that occur every day for shale development, broadly across Pennsylvania and across the region. And with that, I'll hit the brakes. I know you guys are under a fairly tight time frame today, so I'm happy to answer your questions. Yes, sir.
What's the projected life of shale gas in western Pennsylvania?
I think Joe kind of alluded to that. He started talking about, we're kind of the first quarter of this. I use the term that I think we're very much in the first inning of a 9-inning game. We've got a lot of locations that have been designed for anywhere from 8 to 12 wells to be drilled. Many of the operators have only put a couple wells down on those pad locations. There's still lots of acreage to develop. One thing that's of a concern to me, the economics of the play have certainly strained it. It's pushed development to the very far northeast and the very far southwest. That center ribbon of the shale development north of Butler County and west of Lycoming County, I don't want to say it's totally void of capital right now, but it's strained. There were a lot of companies that were investing in that region that aren't investing today. One, because of economics, but two is because of regulatory policy. And I would tell you, I think the opportunity is very long-term, multi-generational, not just in the Marcellus, but the Utica, and potentially other hydrocarbon-bearing formations as well. I think it's another 75 or 80 years easily if we continue to focus on the hydrocarbon-bearing formations that we're aware of. I know there's other research going on in the western part of the state, but there may be other shales that will be delivered under higher market conditions than we have today. Mark.
With Chapter 78, and I know there's a lot of litigation going on, does the Marcellus Shale Coalition take the lead in that, or do you just kind of herd all the companies and parties that are involved in fighting that in the courts and in the legislature? How do you handle that?
Yeah, Mark's question was, does the MSC play the lead role in the litigation like we have in Chapter 78? Many of you may or may not know, Chapter 78 were the surface rules that were developed over the last 4 or 5 years in Pennsylvania. I would share with you, we made a number of major modifications under Act 13 in that area. The biggest concern I have is that we had a secretary in the DEP during the final days of the Chapter 78 development that if you take a look at his email chain, and some of it was disclosed, and I think that was the primary reason why he stepped down, he was trying to slow or stop this industry dead in its tracks. The comments made by the MSC and our membership, over 400 pages of comments. You could take what the DEP accepted in those comments and fit it on the back of a postage stamp. So very little of the work that went on the technical side from Joe's committee was accepted by the department. It left us very little room to do nothing but take it to the courts, and we've done that. We haven't opposed the entire regulation, but we've picked out 7 primary areas to litigate. That's being funded by 14 of our upstream companies right now, primarily the drillers. Historically, MSC has funded that through our funds. This is one where the drillers themselves have wanted to be a part of that, so we're actually being funded primarily by our upstream operators in that litigation. Of the 7 areas that we focused on, we got injunctive relief immediately on 4 of those. Basically, the court stepped in and said DEP outdrove their headlights on 4 of the 7. We'll likely go to an evidentiary hearing by year's end, and we'll see where it ends up. But we have a lot of other challenges. The GP5 and 5A issue, Joe talked about the effort made to capture methane on every single well location. We don't let methane to the atmosphere, we sell methane. Yet the focus from the DEP on GP5 and 5A is pretty much a showstopper in the northern Marcellus. So those comments are due today. I looked at those comments on Friday that have been developed. There's a great body of work that, a permit is something to be fairly simple. The permit application on GP5 is 45 pages. That's a 45-page permit, which tells me DEP was trying to regulate via permit. So I hope we don't end up in litigation. The secretary, I've met the new secretary, seems to be a pretty pragmatic guy. He shared with me that they would take a real hard look at our comments and make changes where necessary. But there are other items other than GP5, things like post-production cost legislation that's been tossed around in the legislature. Some of you may have read about that. It's actually, I believe it's completely unconstitutional because it goes back before shale actually even began to be developed in Pennsylvania. Severance tax, folks asked why the MSC is opposed severance tax. We had a governor in Pennsylvania that wanted no tax. We knew we needed to get money in play in Pennsylvania, so in 2012, under Tom Corbett, we put an impact fee in place. That impact fee now has generated $1.2 billion that's been spread broadly to all 67 counties in the state. It's been a huge benefit for counties like Washington, where we sit today. They've not had an increase in property tax as a result for 5 years. Huge benefit to the region, and by design, it was not to send all the money to the general fund, but to allocate dollars directly into the communities broadly across Pennsylvania. So unfortunately, the governor's approach to 6.5% tax above the impact fee would make us the highest tax rate of any shale play in the United States. That's why the MSC is opposed to it from the beginning. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there an ETA for when Mariner East 2 will be completed?
Yeah, it's a good question. They got problems in Chester County. It's under construction right now. I think it's, I think they're hopeful to be year end, or I think their in-service date is planned for November.
Okay.
So, you know, hopefully they'll meet that date. But Chester County is a problem area for them right now over in the eastern part of the state. But for the most part, you take it right across the turnpike, you'll see pipeline being developed. That's Mariner 2 underway. Other questions? I've left some MSC materials on the table. While a few of my cards, I'm not here to make a big sales pitch for MSC, but would certainly like those of you that aren't engaged in MSC to come over and take a look at what we're doing. I think that being close to our operators and engaged in the fights that we're all engaged in every day, I think will be useful for your company. So thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.